just the facilitator, so I'm gonna keep us on track time-wise and ask questions.
Lorraine should have been on this panel, so.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very interested. First question, and we'll let you all just take off and wander if you want to, but in here. But what's one these three are all have many did you figure out how many years?
Well, Dan, why don't you talk to me?
Do I count Morris Vanderberg too? My mentor?
Yeah.
Okay, you were the commission.
80. 43 for me personally.
29 for me.
29.
33.
So we're in good company.
What mission are you with, sir?
Was with City Union Mission in Kansas City.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Retired.
Okay.
All right. What's one practice that you did that purposefully encouraged faith? What did you plan on? Just, I know you had many things, but what's one thing that you would share with us that you purposefully did it in order to encourage the faith? And we have people here to keep each one honest. I will keep Ann honest.
As much as you can.
Because I was the recipient of his encouraging my faith.
Well, I was embarrassed one time at when a missionary spoke at our church, because he just went on and on about how blessed their ministry was because we prayed, and I thought, yeah, you're not talking to me. I haven't prayed for you. Now, I didn't say that obviously, but I felt it in my heart. I was embarrassed for a missionary that our church supported, and I had not prayed for that missionary. So, I was no part of any of the good things that had taken place through their ministry. But that prompted me to start. That's when I started seriously praying and making a list that I used for many, many years. And on that list, I put all of our staff members. And so over the 5 weekdays, I prayed for our staff, their spouses. My brain used to work really well, and I remembered their children as well. And I wanted to, and I let them know periodically, I pray for you regularly. And, I think that was, I know it was an encouragement because it always was for me when somebody said to me, I pray for you, especially for these people that would say, I pray for you every day, or I pray for City Union Mission every day. And so I think that was one way that both, I think I encouraged the staff, but I also wanted to be an example to them to pray for one another and pray for me too.
But, in the rescue mission work, just said this, I was in a conversation recently with some other leaders of rescue missions, and these other guys were pretty big missions work, and they were lamenting at how many of their staff members were completely ignorant to Christian doctrine, Christian faith. And I think that's one thing with our mission that we've tried to be very careful of, is that when someone comes on staff, they need to know their faith. We got a questionnaire that everybody through, and you can hear the chuckles. Some people thought they were going to get a PhD at the end of it. And it's funny because some people, but it is fairly specific. And so I think the biggest thing we try to do is to ensure that we are our mentors. We don't require someone to be a believer working at church store, but to work in the ministry, they have to be a believer of like faith. And therefore, then, since we're doing devotions and trying to encourage everywhere we can, like he said, and praying for them. But I think the biggest thing is to ensure that you are hiring believers. And two altogether, that's it.
Yeah, so, I completely agree with both guys. One of the things that I do personally is I pray for my staff. It's not every day, but I tell them I pray for them often. And if I do know their children or their spouse, I pray for them as well. The work that we do, especially the frontline guys, like Adam, he works with our emergency services guys. It's hard. There's a lot of stress, and so there's things that I try to do where it's fellowship times, or we have a big Christmas party for our staff that, it's really about worshiping the Lord, but also fellowshipping together, because that fellowship together for me is holding each other up and encouraging each other. And if we see a brother that's down, we try to help pick them up, or if we see sin, try to talk to them about that too. And I allow my staff to be, we're non-denominational, but we're very strict in our beliefs of what our doctrinal statement is. But I have a few guys that are reformed, and I'm reformed myself, but I don't let my staff, I don't talk about my background as much with that, because I want them to be able to freely speak. So they have conversations all the time freely, right, Adam, where they're able to talk about what their beliefs are. And again, like Mike said before, it's iron sharpens iron. So if they're talking about what their beliefs are and their background, and hey, I believe this about it, and as long as they don't argue, I'm good about them being able to do that. So I think those are ways that we're able to encourage. And then I'm always telling my staff, look, right now I'm currently looking for a church myself. My church that I was going to was not really reaching my daughters. I have two daughters that are 16 and 13, and they were getting less and less encouraged by church. And I said to my wife, I love my church, but I've got to find somewhere else. Well, the hard part for me was leaving the church and telling my staff, hey, I'm not going to that church anymore, because I want to show a faithful spirit of what I do. I've been going there 19 years, and that's part of my faithfulness, and I want my staff to have that experience too with going to church. So I encourage that all the time with them. Find a good church. You need to get away from the mission to have your fellowship with the Lord as well. It can't just be at the mission. No, some of it needs to be at the mission, but you need that fellowship away from the mission as well.
Speaking of getting together, we do I think it's 3 times a year, we try to have a house staff and rip. We started this last year, started by a board member, where we get together fellowship, alternate devotion time, and it's usually on off hours, and we've had it in nice restaurants, we've had it in churches, and the churches serve us, and we try to make it where they're not working.
So you're giving us some good ways that practices, and you also got into some policy. Extend just a little bit when you're talking about fellowship with you get your staff together and you're doing something that involves talking about that. How do you do that? How do you sit them around in a circle and ask them questions? Or?
Well, we just did a survey. It was conducted, and we did it blindly. No one knew who the answers are. And this particular board, well, he's former board member now, he got the results and put them together. And he's coming up from here. We're going to develop the subjects that will be taught in these things they want to do for a minute.
Can you give us an example of what you mean by the topic that you're going to talk about?
Well, it started off with we were talking about marriage. And I don't know if this is coming in, but we're from Oklahoma. But we started off with we were going to do marriage, and then we talked to Andrew Craner, and Andrew Craner said you can't do just married people, you can't do single people. So we started doing, our motive, frankly, the board member's motive in the beginning was we don't want to see staff members' marriages fail. And over my 29 years, I think I've seen two, maybe more, two or three, that their marriages failed while employed at their mercenaries. And we don't want to see that. We want to do what we can to ensure that doesn't happen. Unfortunately, sometimes I think people go into ministry hoping it'll save their marriage. And it may have saved some that I'm not aware of, but there's one particular I'm thinking of. I know that they were having a lot of problems before they came to the mission. But the point being is that we work with, our original motive was about marriage, family, and how to have a separate life outside of the mission. That doesn't, where the mission doesn't destroy their life. We don't want to destroy their life.
Yeah, just real quick, Lauren.
Sure.
Yeah, we pray, of course, at our meetings and things like that, but I really encourage them to pray. And I think about 10 years ago, I had put out a week before that we were going to have just a prayer, an hour of prayer with our staff. And it struck me because I think one of the things that we, as leaders, sometimes forget is that there's different levels of faith that are going on in our mission at all times. People are strong in their faith, and some are not as strong. And so we got to the prayer time, and I'm used to being able to, hey, let's open it up, and somebody start off, and then for an hour we were just going to pray. Well, about 15 minutes later, there was nobody praying, and it struck me to say, wow, is that because of my faith with the mission that the folks aren't praying? And we can't take that on like that. At the time that we're there, if we had that prayer session now, I know that we might have to go 2 hours. I mean, because it's a different set of folks there that are at different levels of their faith, right? And so we do things like that. We'll have group prayer, and but we do things like this too, where we'll have, like, I'll teach a Dave Ramsey series for 10 weeks, and that's it's not just about, praying but the fellowship that's there. And of course he's Christ-centered, and when he talks his talk, but we'll have classes like that. I think that the fellowship of believers together, where we're holding each other up, is the important part of making sure you're watching out for burnout, and making sure that folks that, and we have some folks that went through the program that work for us, so we're making sure that they're doing okay. And he mentioned, this is why I was saying this too, we had a major affair that happened 6-7 years ago at the mission, and you as a leader go, what am I doing wrong, right? But a lot of times when we're doing that mirror check of ourselves, it's not where our faith is, it's where our staff faith was at the time. And so that's why I think it's important for leaders to be praying for our staff at all times. It doesn't mean they're all going to be right with the Lord in their own lives. I mean, but that's the things that we have to encourage. I've got about 150 staff members now, and I don't even get to see most of our thrift store employees a lot of times, but I know this, that we're all in the same devotional, and it's New Morning Mercies that we do, and it's, what is it, David Paul Tripp, or Paul David Tripp? Paul David Tripp, I knew I'd get that wrong. But, we all are in the same, it does day by day, so we're, as a mission as a whole, all in the same scripture reading and devotional for the day. Even at our thrift stores, we have 7 locations, and all of them are doing the same exact devotion that our senior staff are doing, or our ministry staff are doing. So, just some thoughts.
Good. And Dan, did you ever have any policy about prayer time for staff?
I was going to mention that. Yeah, well, we used to have a requirement. I think it was 3 times a week to join one of the prayer groups. And that, I don't think it's that way anymore, but it was good, because it really brought people together. Some didn't necessarily want to be required to be there, but it didn't take long for any of them to get to the place where they heard from coworkers their hearts and needs in their own lives, and I think it really turned into a very positive time. We had it at our family center, we had it at the men's center, had it through our program times, and just a lot of prayer times that were so important in building fellowship and good connections and things like that. And we've sure had a lot of, I believe, lots of answers to prayer over the years of working with men and families and even staff who are going through difficult times. I was in Michigan just a few days ago with visiting family, and I've been praying. I come from at least my mom's side of the family, unchurched, forever and ever. And I've been praying for my aunts, uncles, cousins for years. and one of the great things was I had a cousin in an unsaved family who became a Christian. His twin sister then did, their mom. That's the only family so far. But then I found out this last week when I was there that another cousin's son, so what is that, a nephew? Yeah, no, it's not. Second cousin. Anyway, had become a Christian and was baptized. And again, I haven't gotten an opportunity. I didn't see that person, but I'm going to say I've been praying for you for many, many years. And so, staff prayer is critical too for each other, but for the men and the women and families, the young people who we work with as well.
Testimony about that too with the prayer. I've had a few staff when they came on that when we would do corporate prayer time, they wouldn't want to do their prayer. They were real cautious about praying out loud. It was a real personal thing between them and the Lord. An interesting thing is through the years, quite a few of those folks now are avid prayers aloud in the corporate prayer time. And, I think that shows growth. I mean, it shows that there's a comfortableness to be able to share an intimate time with the Lord that we can do corporately, right? And I think that's the joy you find as a leader when you see somebody that even as a staff member comes along and said, hey, I'm not comfortable doing that. And then 5 years later, they're one of the ones leading the prayer,
And Dan, what did you do when a staff person came and said, why are you paying me to pray? He has a great answer for this.
Oh, really? Help me. What was my answer?
He helped that person, and it wasn't me, but he helped that person understand that we did not exist unless God was blessing the ministry. And so paying you to pray is as valuable as going out and getting a donor or doing whatever you're.
Part of their job responsibilities, to pray for one another, pray for our finances and everything else.
Yeah, that question kind of assumes that prayer is not important.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about your policy regarding salvation and church and so forth. I really appreciated what you were saying because we had that policy, if I can just digress a minute, and I was able to lead people to the Lord that I was interviewing for a job, and when I'm asking them how they would share the gospel, they couldn't tell me, and so I could go ahead and share the gospel with them while they were in interview for a job. But talk to us about whether that's okay to have a policy in your organization that a person has to be a believer or has to be a church or whatever.
It's okay.
You want to, my question was, when you get resistance, how do you deal with it? Sometimes there's people wondering, I guess, why you insist on having Christians working in your Christian ministry.
Well, I mean,
Stuff to be unequally yoked, that's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. You don't want to be unequally yoked, and I've looked at many potential employees, and I'll tell them right off the bat, look, I'm not looking for somebody to come here and fix us. You know, we may not be perfect, but we know what we want to do. We may not be doing everything we want to do, but we know what we want to do. And either you want to do what we want to do, or you don't, you know. And let's settle this now, you know. And because once you come on board, it's a all right.
I want staff to be examples to all of the men and women, young people that we serve. So obviously, you know, as a Christian organization that we're there to share the gospel and see lives changed, you want, you know, from the janitors all the way up to whoever, I wanted them to be believers. Part of our job description would say something about being able to share the gospel with whenever asked, something like that. But you know, being an example. So we had some pretty strict policies. And I got this from my predecessor, Morris Vanderberg, who had as part of the what do we call it, the personnel policy for all the staff, that they were not to drink or use tobacco, whether at home or at work. And I continued that, because I wanted our men to be able, and our families to be able to see everybody that they work, that was on a staff, as an example, not somebody that would say, yeah, I have a beer once in a while, and you know, I wanted because so many of our clients have struggles with alcohol and drugs, so I wanted our staff to be an example in every way possible to represent the Lord.
And I find that today a growing issue. Christians are much more apt today than the cultural Christians used to be. And I'm just like Dan on that. But it's in that questionnaire. Do you use tobacco? Do you use alcohol? And that's probably had more contention over that than I have over just someone being a believer or not a believer or something like that.
We don't have that policy, but I am a teetotaler myself. I'm not a drinker or smoker or any of that. And for me, it's that I don't believe the Bible tells me I can't. I believe it's because I have a lesser person always around me. The Bible talks about, you know, like for me as a father, I have children that are looking at every move I make, right? Well, the same thing about my staff. I have staff that are watching every move I make. So for me is, you know, if we go to a restaurant and they said it's in the bar area, it doesn't mean it's for open time to get a alcoholic beverage. Well, the other part of that for me is well, I'm helping you with alcohol, but I'm okay with it. You know, that's not a very good testimony for me. It's your problem, not my problem, right? I can handle it here. And so, you know, I've had staff members that have a drink of wine or once in a while, and I'll give them my position. They don't understand that. They're like, well, this is the culture here in the South, right? You can be a Christian and drink. It's kind of the thing. But I found more times than not that my staff drink less because of my example than if I force them to by signing something. Because then if I have them sign something, a lot of times it's, well, I'd rather just break that rule, right? Instead of having them do it willingly, I'm forcing them to do that rule. So the other thing is, too, with hiring staff members that are Christians, we're in the deep South, Alabama, right? So everybody's a Christian there, right? And not everybody's a Christian, but they all think they're Christian, right? So one of the things that we talk about is that you're called to come to the mission. It's not just that you're a Christian, but that you feel called to this ministry of Matthew 25, right, where it talks about that you're going to do it to the least of these. Because if you don't have that calling, this is the hardest job you're ever going to have. If you have that calling, it's still going to be the hardest job you're ever going to have, right? And that's the thing for me is that, you know, I can only see by their fruit. We're trying to hire as many Christians as possible, but I want them to have the call.
Yeah. And speaking of that, thrift stores, We actually have two corporations that we hire through. One is the Ministry of the Durham Rescue Mission, and that's where we have these strict rules. Then we have another temporary agency where we can, originally we started to hire people out. We would be the company where people, if you wanted to hire somebody to work.
Like day labor, right?
Yeah, day labor or even longer. That was the original intent. It's kind of become the company that runs our thrift stores in a sense. And, but it is, by definition, it's not a secular, I mean, it's not a religious incorporation. And so because we hire our clients, we don't require a profession of faith to be employed in that. If we were hiring someone at Clegg's Extermination, we wouldn't require them to have a profession of faith for that. So we can't require it. Our thrift stores are almost exclusively ran and operated by clients. There's just a handful of people that are, of the 110, 100 employees, I'd say 10 are not former clients, current clients. And the point I'm getting to is that in that corporation, we're not doing all that we're talking about here. But on our ministry side, we do have these rules, we do have these stipulations.
What would be the split for you, like how many percent staff are on the one side compared to the other?
I'm not sure your question, but
So how many would be under your original organization? How many staff members under that compared to the other?
47.
45 right now.
So
Staff,
50-50
tax,
almost, 56, 40-60 maybe?
But
I'd say
because we have 100 and
about 100, 110 on the other side.
on the other side of clients.
For the thrift stores. And that includes people that are not working for us too. They're working at Clegg's Exterminating or Hackney Wood Company or whatever. And, but there's no religious requirements there, is what I'm getting to.
And some of that, and all of you were alluding to it, there's some legal issues in there that allow you to, Dan was saying he puts it in the, yeah. And that saved you legally because as long as it's in this, they have to have it. I can't explain what you did, but it was very useful legally.
Well, so far it's still legal. There was a case out in Seattle where they were trying to hire a lawyer and a man who was gay applied, and they were coming against them for being religious and saying you can't hire just, they still are okay with it. That case went through and it was still okay that you can hire, you can say, we're a Christian organization, we're only gonna hire Christians. And, but.
And it was in the policy.
Yeah, that's right, but be praying about that, and your general prayer is that the United States stays that way, because, you know, it could be next year that they come along and say, no, you can't do that anymore.
There's one more the other way, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing that, like the Durham Rescue Mission is actually incorporated as a church versus some other corporations. So we have the same protections, we're supposed to have the same protections without a church for that. The church is not required to hire an atheist as pastor.
Is union that way?
No.
You're not, we're not either. We're not either.
So as this is fitting into this topic of growing staff faith, you both, all three of you alluded to the effect of some of the policies or practices that you have, church attendance, salvation, those kinds of things. So if you have a mix, the one positive that I see in that, and I've heard from your people in our, when we had a mix of stores that were hired by somebody else, the Christians that were there, the graduates of our programs took it on as an evangelistic opportunity to go after the people they were working with, which was kind of fascinating.
I'd say this too, we've had people at our thrift stores, and I can confirm this, we had a guy that was an atheist that said, hey, I'll sign that, I'll get a job, I'm a Christian, you know? And then he came a couple years later and said, yeah, I said I was a Christian, I've not been a Christian the whole time. I mean, that's, and so again, it's by their fruit you shall know them, it's not really by putting their signature on a paper.
Right.
That's the tough part.
And what happens if he was a real kick butt employee and then says later, hey, you know what, I'm an atheist, and what's your take on that?
I was switching to our other corporation.
So I was thinking, you know, like, if the job market was such where jobs were scarce, right, and me being the person that I could possibly be deceitful in an application, which I'm sure happens all the time, not just on a question of your, you know, what is your faith, and then you hire the person and he happens to be just like this, you know, amazing counselor who is helping all your clients, and all of a sudden he comes back to me and says, you know what, I'm a fraud.
Yeah.
Because I lied on that application, you know, and then all of a sudden now we're conflicted, right?
I think the legal part happens more after you've already hired somebody. So, if you hire somebody that is a Christian, or says they're a Christian, and if you do that process on the way in, it's easier legally. It's harder to fire them because they're not a Christian. So that's something you really have to watch and make sure you have all your T's crossed and I's dotted, because especially if they're doing their job, if they're not having write-ups or anything like that, and you're like, you know, hey, I'm the best driver you've ever had, and sorry, you're not Christian, we gotta fire you. Boy, that'd be tough. And here's the other thing, what kind of witness am I to them if I'm saying, hey, just because you're not, hey, I want them to be there to see the other Christians that are around them, to help lead them down the path that's gonna take them away from that, you know, atheist path that they're on. Yeah.
But to answer, that's why I have that questionnaire that I have. 'Cause I mean, if you're not a Christian, you're probably not gonna know how to answer that. There's a lot.
Well,
No,
I
I
find
could
people
say
when
that.
I send them the questionnaire, typically well, first of all, if they ignore the what's your Christian testimony on the application, there's probably something up. If I follow up with that questionnaire, usually, if they're not serious about their faith, then I never hear back from them again. I mean, we're talking about a 3.5-page questionnaire that really goes into a lot of, I mean, really theological type things. Not that you can't Google that, you could probably use AI to
ChatGPT.
fill that,
Yeah.
right? To fill that out now, but.
Well, yes,
They're
but
getting
there's
back their own
people,
testimony.
sure, there's people in local churches, there's people in fundamental churches that aren't Christian.
That was my points, because there's levels, right? There's levels to your faith and where you're at in life, right? Like a conflict is if you're a true Christian and you're supposed to be honest, truthful the whole way, and the cop pulled me over and he's all, you know what I pulled you over for? Well, let me start. I ran the red light, I'm speeding, and I didn't stop to turn right, right? It's not when I'm supposed to be of benefit that I'm supposed to be honest, but honest all the way around, right?